I'm going to do a few videos where I compare the Transition Spur to the Niner Jet 9 RDO. And the reason I'm doing this is not really to help people who are trying to decide between those exact two bikes, because that's probably a pretty small percentage of people. But rather, I do want to help people who are trying to decide between one of those bikes. But more importantly, doing comparisons like this really helps bring out the ride qualities of different kinds of trail bikes. So both of these bikes are made by companies that I really like their bikes that they put out, but they have a little bit different viewpoint on what a mid-travel 29er should ride like. So on paper, there are some similarities of these bikes. For example, they both have 120 mil travel in the rear. They're both 29ers. The handlebar widths are both 800. The stem lengths, I think, are both 50 on both of the bikes. So there are some things that would make you feel like the bikes are going to ride pretty similar to each other, but in reality, these two bikes ride quite a bit differently from the other one. So let's get into it. This first video that I'll do comparing these two bikes is going to talk about how they do on slow technical terrain. So today I went down to Santos and I stuck to the red trails where there's hardly any flow, but it's rocky. It was wet today, so it rained the night before. The roots and the lime rock was slippery. So it was a pretty good testing ground to see how these bikes handle on rough terrain, but again, that's pretty slow. Now, sometimes I feel like that the slower technical trails are more difficult than technical trails where you're coming downhill and going pretty fast, because of the way you've got to maneuver the bikes and the way you've got to really balance over the bikes. Also, the way your weight is distributed when riding slow tech is differently than when you're coming down a mountain. So coming down a mountain, you're leaned pretty far back. Whereas on this kind of stuff, you're really moving your weight forward and backwards if you're trying to get up and over a rock or, coming around a corner. So again, it's a pretty unique riding ground to test these bikes to start off with. So let's talk about the Jet 9 first. So the front end of the Jet sits up a little bit higher. The head tube is a little bit taller and it's got more millimeters of travel on the front fork. And so again, the front end feels like it's a little bit higher. That gives you a little bit more confidence when you're hitting really rough terrain. So your weight is back just a little bit more. And also the bike manual is a little bit easier. So it's a little bit easier to just do a non-pedaling manual or to do a wheelie. So the front end just feels a little bit more maneuverable. Also, the Jet 9 has a 30 millimeter shorter wheelbase than the Transition Spur. And so when you look down at the front tire, it's just tucked in a little bit more. The head angle is 1 degree steeper. And you wouldn't think that a 1 degree steeper head angle would make a big difference, but it gives the Jet 9 just a more playful feel. It just feels a little bit more poppy, more maneuverable, a little bit more agile. It accelerates a little bit better. The suspension on the Jet 9 feels a little bit firmer than the Transition Spur. And I think part of that is Niner CVA suspension. So it also feels like the suspension sits up a little bit higher in its travel. So when you're giving really hard efforts on the pedals, it feels like the Jet 9 accelerates a little bit better because the suspension is firmer. Something else that gives the Jet 9 a little bit more playful feel is the stiffer frame. And the Jet 9 is about 3 pounds heavier than the Spur, and so that heavier frame is going to make for a frame that's stiffer. And I've said that before in some of my other videos, but you can really feel it on the trail, especially when you're going through rock gardens. It feels like you can hold your line a little bit easier on the Jet 9. Also, the bottom bracket is a little bit higher on the Jet 9, which is good and bad because you do have less pedal strikes, so you're a little bit less concerned when you're just trying to crank through rock gardens. So again, slow tech. Some of the slow tech, you're having to kind of wheelie and get up over rocks and roots, and you don't have to think about pedal strikes quite as much on the Jet 9 versus the Transition Spur. The downside is you feel a little bit more top heavy on the Jet 9. So I said, slow tech is unique because of the balancing. When you're going through that stuff, you're really having to shift your weight around. And the Jet 9, it's not real noticeable, but you do feel like you're a little bit more top heavy, and therefore you're going to have to work on your balance a little bit more when you're going through slow rock gardens or roots. Now let's talk about the Transition Spur. So the frame on the Spur is a little bit more flexible than the Niner Jet 9. That can be good and it can be bad. The bad part is it's a little bit harder to hold your line going through rock gardens. So there are times when the bike kind of comes off its line a little bit and you've got to use a little bit more attention to bring the bike into correction. Now the good thing about the frame is it is planted and smooth. So well, let's talk about the smooth first. So the head angle is 1 degree slacker. So it's a 66-degree head angle. And the bottom bracket is lower. The seat tube is a little bit steeper, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And the wheelbase is 30 millimeters longer. So that's going to give it that smooth, planted feel. Now the frame, you can feel it absorb impacts going through rock gardens. So when you're charging through a rock garden, I feel like the Transition Spur is going to remain a little bit more composed. In other words, it's not going to be thrown around a little bit like the Jet 9 could be. However, the Jet 9 is more maneuverable. So I know that's kind of hard to put into words, but if you're charging through stuff, the Spur feels a little bit more planted. And also the frame, you can feel it absorbing bumps a little bit better than the Jet 9. So the Spur actually, to me, felt like it had a little bit more than the 20 mil travel that it actually has. Now, if you're going through rock gardens and tech stuff and you're really wanting to maneuver, snap the bike around, loft the front wheel, then the Jet 9 is a little bit better. At the end of the day, I felt like I would kind of be able to pick a winner on the slow tech, but really the story was the bikes just felt different. I can't say that one is better than the other. Now, one thing about the Spur that cannot be overlooked is how light the bike is. And I really noticed that when I went from the Jet 9 back to the Spur, I just felt like you could feel the 3-pound difference. And so, even though the Spur is a little bit more planted with a longer wheelbase, slacker head angle, there are times where you feel you can throw it around just a little bit more than the Jet 9, but the main area that I felt like the weight savings came in is obviously the climbs. And I can't wait to get both of these bikes up to the mountains, which is what I'm going to do in about 4 weeks from now, and really put these to the test, both on the climbs and on the descents. But on the slow tech climbs, the Spur, the Spur just felt a little bit lighter. Now, like I said, the Jet 9 had a little bit firmer pedaling platform, and so when you're accelerating hard, it's kind of hard to pick a winner. I will say today was really hot. Like the humidity was insane, and I probably overdid it in the beginning of the ride because I felt like I just got a little dehydrated, overheated, and so I was really tired at the end of the ride. The last segment of my ride today was on the Transition Spur, and I appreciated the weight savings when I got back on the bike. So to sum up this first comparison, I would describe the Jet 9 as agile, maneuverable, playful. I would describe the Spur as smooth, planted, and light. Like I said, keep an eye out on the channel in about 4 to 5 weeks from now where I'll post a video of talking about both of these bikes riding in the mountains. And I think that after that trip, I'll be able to pick a winner because like I mentioned in the video where I showed my bike fleet, one of these is going to end up as my 29er trail bike. So in a few months from now, the other one will leave the fleet. And as of right now, I cannot tell you which one that's going to be. Both of these bikes have very unique, very fun riding characteristics, and it's hard to pick a winner at this point. That will wrap it up for this video. As always, questions and comments, drop those below. Thanks for watching.